IP as a whole is valued at around several $1 trillion. We've dubbed the whole world of DeFi for IP as IP-fi. If we don't do something about it, like no one will want to share or contribute their work publicly ever again because they'll know it's just going to get ingested.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the DeFi Podcast. We're all back from our round of conferences. I went to one conference in the last month, the Avalanche conference, but Rhett and JF were, I think, at 2 or 3, maybe 4 conferences over the past month. So it's good to get everyone back. And today we have a special guest with us, Andrea from Aria Protocol. Hey, Andrea, how are you doing?
Hey, guys. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be a special guest on this podcast. I'm looking forward to diving deep into the latest DeFi news, as well as talk a little bit about Story.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, Story Protocol looks really interesting. We'll get into it in a little bit. But first, let's do a quick market update. So for, traditional markets have stayed very strong while we've been out. Stocks are hovering about 3% below all-time highs. We haven't yet... Not only have we fully recovered the losses from the Liberation Day announcements in April, but we've pushed well beyond them. And that's, despite the threat of tariffs kind of still hanging in the air. Crypto, meanwhile, my feeling is we continue to flirt a little bit with a bull market. Bitcoin hit an all-time high about 2 weeks ago. It touched like 112K before pulling back. And right now we're at about 104K. Ethereum is not doing as well. It's still well off the all-time highs. But what is really interesting is the ETH to BTC ratio rallied, really sharply, about 40% off the lows. And it's kind of hanging in there for the past week or so. So I'm not really a technicals guy, but if you pull up a 10-year ETH BTC chart, you'll notice that the recent bottom in ETH BTC lines up really well with kind of the 2019 lows. So it seems like we have some key support there. So if you kind of move on from Bitcoin and Ethereum and look at altcoins, which is, I think, what we all find probably the most interesting, as a group, they're still kind of languishing, but there are some bright spots. So for example, Hype had an absolutely monster Memorial Day weekend. It broke through its previous all-time highs and touched 40 before retreating. I think now it's at around like $34 or so. And then what's really interesting is if you look across the major buckets in altcoins, like SPX 6900 is doing pretty well. WIF is doing pretty well. Like they've kind of come back from the April lows. Zcash is doing well in the privacy space, Virtuals in the AI space, and Aave in the DeFi space. So like when I step back and look at the whole picture, like equities are close to all-time highs. Bitcoin is making new all-time highs, and ETH BTC ratio is ripping higher. And we kind of have a handful of these blue chip altcoins across major categories, like catching a strong bid. To me, it feels like maybe the asset allocators are, returning to crypto and moving a bit further down the risk curve. That's kind of my sentiment of where the market is. But let me pause there and say, you guys, I know you've been at conferences and such, probably working really hard as builders, not as market focused. But how do you guys feel about the market going to all these conferences? What did you guys see?
I remain always perma-bullish on the market at large, but it's interesting you call out Zcash. It's like that one. They pioneered some really important tech, but since clear back, like 2018 era, they've price action has never been that great, but up almost 100% on the year is pretty nice. So glad to see them winning. I don't have any Zcash, but it's great tech, and they pioneered a lot of ZK tech as well, which is really important to the space. I had an interesting interaction on Twitter or X a couple of days ago where there's been some people saying that they think we're at the tail end of the bull market. And, it's
scary,
funny.
right?
Yeah. I don't know if that's true, but it doesn't feel like much of a bull market to most of us because it's okay, Bitcoin's at all-time highs and so is Hype. And there's been a few DeFi winners, over the last few years, like Pendle, Athena, a few others. But almost everything else is way far off all-time highs. Ethereum is, Solana's not even at all-time highs. Yeah, the other L ones, almost nothing. And, the bull in me says, it would be a little bit of a weird bull market if almost nothing touched all-time highs again before it went back into the next bear. To argue with myself a little bit, the last bull market was abnormal, because it turns out there was a ton of hidden leverage and a lot of manipulation. And so the Three Arrows capital effect, them plus Terra Luna, Genesis, I kind of, Michael Burry at the time came out, and he's always right about things that I'm surprised by. I should stop getting surprised. Like he was early to GameStop as well, like 2 years early to GameStop. But anyway, he came out.
Who is this? Who is this? Sorry, say his name again.
Michael Burry.
Oh,
he
Michael
was
Burry,
like the guy who, the Big Short, autistic guy. Anyway, it's funny. He bought GameStop like 2 years before its big surge. But like right before the blow up of last cycle, he's like, hey, there's way more leverage in crypto than people realize. It's all going to blow up. And I remember going and looking at like Aave, MakerDAO, and et cetera. And I'm like, there's not that much leverage. And you can inspect it because it's on chain. But the problem was there's tons of off chain hidden leverage that I wasn't paying attention to through Genesis mostly, but others as well. So maybe it's true that like a lot of assets were abnormally high last cycle and it'll take a whole cycle to recover, kind of like what happened to XRP last cycle. I think that's possible. I also personally think that Bitcoin is maybe like abnormally high relative to the rest of the market because of MicroStrategy and its clones. Like that whole play where they've been able to tap into TradFi dollars and just gobble that up at cheap rates and buy Bitcoin, I think will get duplicated with other assets. There's now one of those that just launched for ETH. But because it's only been happening to Bitcoin, yeah, maybe it does end up being like the main winner this cycle. I'd be disappointed though. Like if ETH and the other major L1s don't hit all-time highs this cycle, I'll be disappointed. So I'm betting that they do.
I think all of us feel that way a bit. JF, we were on a call the other day and you had an interesting take. I don't know if you're willing to share it, but you spent like a week at Consensus and then you went to the Avalanche Summit. And then last week you were at the Bitcoin Summit and, you were also in New York, just networking in general. You really have been pounding the pavement for the past month. And your take, I'm curious to have you share it a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just, obviously our industry is just professionalizing. All the players are way more sophisticated than previous than like when I got in initially. I think it's becoming like just the merger of finance and DeFi. It's a little bit hard to sort of like separate now. It's like becoming one. I think it's just becoming like just a real industry. And specifically, I think what I saw like at the difference between these different conferences, Bitcoin seems to be the big winner in terms of just TradFi adoption. And you just see it in the type of people that you see walking around these conferences. So I think like a smaller sort of builder conference like Avalanche Summit, and I imagine most of the e-conferences are like this, like just the age groups are younger and it's more builders. Then you go to Consensus. Consensus is a little bit more gray hairs and salesy and so on. And then you go to Bitcoin and it's yet again older. And you just feel like just the people there, not everyone, but there's just more money in the room and more serious sort of like traditional finance money.
Got it. Okay. Now, Andrea, I know you're probably head down builder mode, probably not looking at charts as much as we are, or maybe you are. I don't know. Maybe you're up at night honestly, late.
Yeah. Not looking too much at charts, although I should because I'm very good at losing money. But the one thing I have noticed is like a general trend, and maybe it's not just in the last couple weeks, but more generally, over the last months, aside from, as JF pointed out, like there's a lot more institutional involvement. And I'm starting to see a lot more focus on RWAs in general. Like this has been either from the Twitter timeline, from conversations. Obviously, Story is part of it, but I'm seeing it also outside of Story. I think there was a recent also news around the Ethereum Foundation, right, and around their allocation, and that mentioned RWAs, and so it feels like the asset class is moving from just being within crypto to slowly more and more moving outside of crypto and bringing and tokenizing it back in, which I think is an interesting macro movement, because if you think about it, like that's new capital, that's new value that's being brought on chain, right? And I know that Rhett, you were talking about like kind of the drivers of the last bull run. I think if we do get a lot of significant value moving into crypto from new asset classes, that's one way that we could sustain it or even increase it. So Also perma bullish.
Nice. So there was a headline that happened like half an hour before this call, so I haven't had time to investigate it yet. But JP Morgan announced that they were going to accept Bitcoin ETFs and other crypto ETFs as collateral, which is a big move. Like all the banks follow JP Morgan's footsteps. Like they're basically the number one bank. And, I don't use leverage myself, but I'd be happy for TradFi to engage in crypto leverage to help repeat 2021, at least the positive part of 2021. That would be great. You also mentioned the Ethereum Foundation. So let's move on to this. So, Rhett, you're probably a bit plugged into this. I don't know if you got to see the announcement yesterday, but the Ethereum Foundation has been way more active recently. They've been publishing a bunch of, blog posts and like direction and mission and all this stuff. But yesterday they also published something about what they're going to do with their treasury. And it was a bunch of things. A lot of it was around like transparency around ETH sales and their operating budget. And I think they promised to like publish financials and basically give people a lot more clarity about what they're doing, which I think people will appreciate. But I think the thing that everyone really cares about is, they're going to continue to actively deploy their treasury assets. I think now they've invested in Aave and a couple of other things. I forgot what it was, like maybe Spark and something else, right? And they might invest
Compound, maybe.
Was it Compound? Okay. But they're,
and hedge fund lending markets.
Yeah, probably the lindiest, projects out there, but they're probably going to move a little bit further down the risk curve. I mean, not much, of course, like they're going to have to be super, super conservative. But what did you think about that announcement when you saw it? Do you have a sense of like where they would engage? Probably like staking would probably be the first step, right? Because they don't stake in either ETH, but you saw that and, any thoughts to share on that?
Yeah, I think it's positive. I think, for them to, deploy their treasury into DeFi, which is the biggest, use case in crypto, helps, that injection of liquidity helps DeFi grow. So they're helping out their own ecosystem. It's good. I think it's also good that it helps extend runway, their earning yield on these things. The concerns that they had in the past of like, hey, we don't even want to stake our ETH because if there's a contentious hard fork, we want to be like, wash our hands of it or whatever. I think I actually really love their desire to be like credibly neutral. I think that's really valuable. But I think they were maybe a little further on the end of that spectrum than was necessary. I think some of it was also like being in a defensive posture because it turns out like Biden admin was investigating them and, planning to go after them like they were everyone. And so I think they're just trying to be as, in the past in a more defensive posture. But I think remaining like more neutral is good, but, supporting DeFi, supporting, staking the network, validating the network, earning some yield. I think those are all like really positive things for their runway, sustainability, and like growing the ecosystem and supporting the ecosystem. So I think that's really good. I like the transparency changes too. I think they and a lot of these other foundations, people know what a lot of their wallets are. So it already was like basically transparent, but it's like it sometimes felt a little bit like there'd be complaining on Twitter because like someone would be like, hey, look, ETH, foundation just sold some ETH. And I think it's probably just better for community sentiment and expectations to give, announce that stuff and give forward guidance and things like that. Like Chainlink, for example, some of the founders of Chainlink have been doing just like kind of programmatic sales of Link for a long time. And it's like not a bad thing. It's good to get the, ownership of the network more distributed, et cetera, but having it like known and expected. So if you come and buy Link, you kind of like know that Sergey is going to be selling a certain amount every month for some period of time. I think that's positive. So I consider these all pretty positive changes. Most of them are changes that probably couldn't have happened 2-3 years ago. It wasn't even like necessarily like a mistake. They weren't doing this before. It was that they were in like, they were necessarily in like a defensive legal posture.
Yeah, I think they're in a position where they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. Like they have a huge amount of assets. So whatever they do, people are going to complain, right? But I kind of applaud the just getting more involved, rolling up the sleeves, and because other chains are doing it, right? So if you can't just sit on your laurels and be the first smart contract chain that gained traction and just hope that everything is going to turn out well. So to me, is a very positive sign.
One other quick thought. I'm not saying they necessarily should do this, but one way, like if they wanted to remain even like more neutral, they could engage with like a third party, say, hey, you're going to deploy our assets with this kind of mandate. But we're not going to be the ones deciding whether Aave or Morpho get ETH deposits. That might be positive. I think they've remained pretty neutral and they've been pretty like fair in how they've deployed their assets so far. It's just like, hey, we're just deploying it to like long-term Lindy markets, trying not to pick winners, but also not being super risky, throwing a bunch of money into a brand new protocol. That is one thing they could do possibly to like be even more kind of like a degree of separation from the deployments themselves.
Cool. Okay. I was, that's one positive sign. Ethereum Foundation getting a little bit more involved in DeFi. I was going to spend some time talking about the Circle IPO, which is priced yesterday. And I don't think it's started trading yet, but it seems like it's being received really well, which is hopefully going to continue. Like I'm looking at the Circle IPO as a barometer of what's happened. Like how much interest does TradFi really have to put into crypto? Like this is one of the main ways they can do that. So hopefully that goes well. But it's
also going to help us, like, I think price things, right? Because a lot of stuff in DeFi is just so illiquid that like you see prices and it's like, well, what does that mean? Right. But this is going to be a pretty liquid asset. So I think it will be a nice comparable for a lot of projects.
Agreed. Okay, so let's pause there and let's move on to Story Protocol, which I've heard about it a few times, but when we found out we were going to have you on the protocol, we did a little bit more of a deep dive, Andrea. But just for our viewers, can you just briefly explain at a high level, like what is Story Protocol?
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of illiquid assets, JF, that you were just saying, if not many people know this, but IP as a whole is valued at around several $1 trillion, right? Like some people say up to $70 trillion. And if you think about the total market cap of crypto right now, right, like we're talking orders of magnitude higher. And so it really is a sleeping giant, especially if we look at it from a DeFi lens. But if we look at it from more of like a product and just a problem in the world lens, is IP is not just illiquid, but it's also very inaccessible to most people, right? People, when they hear the word IP, they're thinking, oh, something complex, something that has to do with lawyers, something that only companies with very expensive IPs have to deal with. But really anything that is human creation or AI creation, right? Any that's whether it's a trademark, whether it's a patent, whether it's a copyright, it is all IP. And so Story, going back to answering the question, with this context in mind, Story is trying to both make it accessible to everyone and make it liquid, right? So kind of what Bitcoin did for money, we want to do for IP, as well as kind of what Ethereum did for decentralized computing, also do for IP, in the sense that with that, if you create something new, you can just register it, set license terms programmatically or through applications without having to deal with the bureaucracy or just the paper-based process that we have today. And I'll just share one more anecdote. Like the reason why it's so much needed is like current IP and copyright law is based on very antiquated technology, right? It goes back to the printing press. And back then, the channels of distribution were very centralized, right? You had radio stations, you had TV channels, you had music distributors. Now everything is peer-to-peer. You have social networks, everyone's remixing content, everyone's creating content, everyone's generating content with AI. And so you have this explosion of content, explosion of IP, and the traditional systems just can't catch up. So in one sentence, like what we're trying to do is make IP programmable. And the way that we do that is we make it programmatically possible to register and programmatically possible to license and trade and do everything that's possible in DeFi with IP as an asset.
When I first heard about Story, it was really interesting to me because I followed NFT, like I didn't buy a ton of NFTs, but I traded the NFT platforms a bit. So it was a really interesting topic to me. Basically, like those guys kind of tried your idea, but it didn't really work. Like, OpenSea as an example, right? OpenSea went and said, like, they basically enticed a bunch of creators to put their IP on chain. You know, they said, hey, get your artwork, put it on chain. And once it starts trading on chain, like you're guaranteed to get royalties, right? Every time the thing sells, like you'll get some amount. So it's like in some way they enticed them to put their IP on chain and said that you'd get paid for it. But then Blur came along and competition happened, and essentially like they backed off and they said like, okay, that 5% royalty that we were paying you on every secondary sale, like we're not going to do that anymore. And it kind of went to zero. And there wasn't anything that the people who put the IP on chain could do about it, you know? And I remember thinking at the time, man, if like someone, instead of doing this on Ethereum where someone can, you know, basically like figure out a way to zero out the royalties, is there a way to do it by putting it on its own chain where you control the validators? I remember having this conversation with some people like 2 or 3 years ago. And now there's Story Protocol. It's like, and Story Protocol is its own chain. Is that right? Like how exactly does it function? Yeah,
exactly. It's its own EVM, fully compatible, fully equivalent, L1. So it was actually, you know, I know that an immediate question that some people may have is like, why an L1? I'll try to keep it super short just in case people that are listening are curious. It actually started just as a protocol that we were going to deploy across different chains. But then we quickly realized, even if we do that, we're going to need to have an aggregation layer. And so we then were like, okay, let's build an L2. And we tried building the L2, but IP is very different than just traditional token swaps because you have to do a lot of like checks and balances within any IP related transaction. If you think, because Story is not just about the IP and the license terms, but it's also about the royalties. It's about disputes. Everything that regulates IP is programmed on chain. And every time you deal with any IP, you have to go through that whole, you know, checks and balances. And IP is hierarchical, meaning that you have parents that you use to create new IP. And those parents may have ancestors, right, that create this massive tree. And if you transact on an IP that's at the bottom of the tree or at the top of the tree, depending on where you look at it, right? If you try to transact on a leaf of that tree, you have to go through all the branches all the way down to the roots to see whether that movement or you know remix is possible. And so by having an L1, we have full control, not just on the tech side. We can use more graph-like databases to represent this hierarchy and this graph-like nature, and do, as you were mentioning, like more Web3 native primitives that just can't be possible if you don't have full control of the validators and the token. And we can get into some examples later, but definitely it was kind of like the reason I bring this up. We got to that point based on trying not to do it, and then we kind of realized we had to do it.
So a simple question is the IP itself supposed to be on chain? So for example, if someone's IP is a picture or a video, is that stuff supposed to actually sit and be stored and accessed on chain?
The IP metadata is. So much when you create a movie or an image, when you register it at the Copyright Office, right, or at the your local governmental office, like you don't store the whole work there, you store a reference of it. What happens on Story is you can register both on-chain and off-chain assets and IP assets, and you can set the terms for them, right? So you can have multiple sets of licenses, for example, commercial license terms, non-commercial license terms, different sets of non-commercial license terms. And who wants to use that IP can permissionlessly mint a license from the terms that they want to agree to, that obviously the author has set and has agreed to because they set them, and kind of run with it, right? And so it's really just facilitating that layer, and the actual work itself can live anywhere. And so there's like this both defensive aspect and offensive aspect. So the defensive aspect is you have a proof of registration, you have a proof of attribution, you have a proof of, hey, I created this at this time, which is also a natural property of copyright, that when you register something, it's yours, but sometimes you have challenges proving it, right? And so by registering it, you have that proof, and that's like the defensive take. But then the offensive is, okay, now everyone else can kind of take your IP and run with it and help it grow. And you have full visibility, because when you create something new with it, you register it as a derivative, and it populates the IP graph of that IP. Right. And you can obviously, based on the license terms that the child IP sets, right, you get it's still, your terms are still enforced on the child IP, going back to your Coinbase example.
That's, yeah, it's smart. I think blockchains they're ledgers, and so they're better to store that kind of information rather than like have a whole like video living on the chain or whatever. So it's kind of maybe an unusual question, but if I'm like, say I'm a creative and I'm kind of I'm not a lover of like IP. I'm more into like free open source, open domain sort of stuff. I could still benefit from this, right? So if I said, hey, I'm going to make a bunch of music and I want it to be like anyone can use it, anyone can make derivative works of it, etc., but they're not allowed to charge royalties on their derivatives if they use my work, then I still want to register here so that I can kind of prove provenance or whatever. I can prove that my work came first and show the derivative, and then if they're trying to go around, limiting access to their derivative works, I can use this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And just to build off of that, a creator, may not know how to code or use smart contracts directly. So we both integrate with apps that are creator based. For example, we're working with a company called Magma. That's a Web2 company. They have 3 million users. It's a collaborative painting tool like Figma, but for painting. And they're adding the registration flow on Story directly in their file register artwork flow, right? So you just go to Magma, like once you're finished painting, you go to file, register artwork. And within Magma itself, you never have to drop or leave Magma, it gets registered. And you can set your license terms so that it can either be like more commercially oriented or more open domain oriented, and have that enforcement, right? And that defensibility, because the way that it works, just in case anyone is curious, the way that we made it possible to be able to set license terms on Story easily is we have a standard copyright-based license, which we call the programmable IP license, that represents all of the most common terms of any license type. And of course, it also supports custom terms if you want. And all of those parameters of those terms are codified on chain in the smart contract. But the actual contract itself is universal, so you don't have to like write your own legal contract. So based on how you personalize the parameters of the contract, you have your version of the pill, right, based on your terms, but you don't have to write the contract. And the contract obviously was not just made up by us or generated via ChatGPT like we would do today, right, or like most people would do today. But we worked with several leading law firms to actually draft it and come up with this universal, legally binding contract based on U.S. copyright law, which is the most extensive and most well-established version of it.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, it seems to make a lot of sense that the IP process, the human IP process, should be like a global process, right? Like to have this like done on a per country basis, which we've done in the past. It seems like just a bunch of sort of like spaghetti processes that's trying to meet together, and it just must be very, very messy. So to coordinate all this in one layer that is publicly available to all humans, just makes a ton of sense. I'm curious, like, how, I don't know if there's been like cases of this yet, but in the future, as people start registering their IP on chain, how does this sort of get hashed out, like from a legal perspective? Because it does, people do live in countries, and then at the end of the day, you do have to go after them through some legal process. Yeah. Like, how does blockchain and then the sort of like current legal spaghetti mess, like how do these two things meet? Yeah,
absolutely. So there's different layers, right? So the first layer is we want to make it as possible for honest actors to do the right thing. A lot of reasons why people pirate in the real world is because it's the easier alternative, right? Like, if you make it very hard for me to access a piece of content, it's just so much easier to pirate it, right? And so if we make it as easy as possible, just as easy to license something legally because it's just one click away, then why don't you do it, right? And so like that's like the first layer of defense, or like the first way that we tackle it. The second way is we have something called a story attestation service, which story being a decentralized network, we can't arbitrate like, hey, like what IP is right, what IP is wrong, et cetera. And so the story attestation service works with independent service providers to anytime an IP is registered and has commercial terms attached, et cetera, it runs checks on these independent providers to see, hey, is this IP potentially infringing? Is this IP, and we have different layers to that attestation service. So one is obviously infringement detection. The other one can be identity and provenance. And then the third layer is disputes. And the dispute module on Story is modular, meaning it can hook into different dispute resolution processes. One of them can be on chain, right? And we're partnering, we've partnered with UMA, for example, to do on-chain dispute resolution. But it can also hook into the real world, so into the court of law. And let's see the real pragmatic answer is badly intentioned people will always be able to do badly intentioned things, and just like they can do today. And there's no real way to fully prevent it, because we're dealing with real world assets. We're dealing with things that are in the real world, and you can't physically stop someone from doing something. However, by lowering the barriers and making it easy as possible to do the right thing, much like how everyone now uses Netflix, Prime Video, Spotify. If you make it easy enough to do the right thing, like the majority of people will do the right thing, or do they will choose the proper way to do it, and that's the only sustainable way for IP to grow, right? Especially in this age of AI where it's even beyond humans now, right? Like you were talking about, you were referring to humans and states and governments, but now there's the majority of content being created today is AI generated and agents. And this is like a whole new fascinating layer, which probably even makes it more urgent to have a programmable layer for agents to be able to transact. So I was actually a author of the Agent TCP/IP paper, which was a white paper on agent-to-agent transactions of IP and how they could use Story and a standard communication protocol to basically negotiate terms and license each other's knowledge, skills, IP as agents get more and more specialized.
This is perfect, actually, because when I was doing research on the firm, it looks like you guys were founded in 2022, right? So was it like 3 years ago? And the AI landscape looked really different when you guys were founded, right? I know that most of the funding came in a little bit later, but so the story must have changed quite a bit, right? So has the way that the people are using Story Protocol, or the way you guys envision using Story Protocol, really changed a lot since you guys founded it? Is it more about, like, if you had to break, like, is it 10% for AI now, 50%, 90%? Like, what are you guys kind of envisioning?
It's 100% for creators and 100% for AI. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, I like that answer. That's a marketing answer. Nice. Yeah.
No, it's true, right? Like it would be very myopic to say, oh no, we knew all along that it was like, the world has changed so much in the last 3 years when it comes to AI and what content and how content is created. So we definitely realized, hey, like what we're building is actually super timely, right? If you think about most of the recent viral moments with AI have inevitably led to IP conversations. Think about Studio Ghibli and Studio Ghibli craze of everyone using Studio Ghibli and like, okay, what does Studio Ghibli get out of this? Some brand.
Yeah, did they get anything besides marketing? Like, what did they get? I had never heard of that term before. Exactly. Now I know what it is, right? Yeah,
exactly. And going back to JF's point, right? Like, I think it would also be naive to say, oh, here's a protocol for licensing. Now, anytime you generate an output, go and register on it and license it and make sure you honor the rules, right? And so like what we're doing is we're working with AI companies directly, because like this type of IP consciousness, this type of IP awareness has to happen at the model level, right? And at the AI tool level. and then it will trickle down to the users. A bit like how Magma, as I was saying earlier, allows users to register seamlessly from their own tool. That's the best way to get IP to be attributed and credited and also rewarded fairly. So we announced a couple months ago our partnership with Stability AI, right? Where we're going to make it easy to register any output as IP on Story. We're talking to a lot of other AI companies. We have a lot of interesting stuff in the AI roadmap as well. So just to shortly answer your question, I know that I sometimes start to talk a lot because it's a very passionate topic for me, but the focus has to be AI as well, because otherwise we would be doing a disservice to creators, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the creators that are powering those models. If you think about it, right? All those models are standing on the shoulders of giants of humanity. If we don't do something about it, no one will want to share or contribute their work publicly ever again, because they'll know it's just going to get ingested, and then anyone else can just replicate it and create something new. So there has to be a sustainable model built, and I don't think the AI companies disagree either. I was watching a TED talk with Sam Altman, and he was saying the same thing. I think he was open to the idea, at least, which is already a big step. I'll stop here. I know I've been rambling.
Yeah, I like that. I think the AI changes things a lot, and there's obviously the output and the inputs to AI that are IP themselves, and also AI models themselves. Before I was in crypto, that's kind of the space I worked in. And it's interesting. There's a website I used to consult a lot for, new experimental models, called Papers with Code, where someone would train some transformer and, show some performance metrics. And then they're like, here's how it hits certain benchmarks, and here's the code. You can come download it and run it and blah, blah, blah. But there wasn't really any way to monetize. And I've wondered, if any random data scientist from their home can take a frontier model, retrain it in some way, or, build a distillation model or something that has some really cool properties. If they could then, kind of register, plug it in here, anyone can use it, but there's an easy way to get royalties off use. I think there's some interesting things there. So a follow-up question. I'm glad to hear that Story is EVM compatible. And as kind of a DeFi maximalist, I think that, if Story ends up gobbling up a lot of IP registration, and then especially if there's royalties are paid on chain as well through Story, it seems like there's some really nice use cases for DeFi there. So Pendle has gotten really famous lately for yield trading. People will take a yield-bearing asset and spit off the principal on the yield token and trade and speculate, et cetera. But I think there's some cool things you could do with something like that, where I'm an IP owner and I can sell off the next 5 years of royalties 100%. Through some DeFi protocol. Is that something you guys are looking into, or builders trying to build those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean. That's exactly it. I mean, I wanted to get your guys' opinion on it. We've dubbed the whole world of DeFi for IP as IP-Fi. Is this sacrilege, or is it okay?
That's great. I like it. IP-Fi. I like it.
Okay.
IP-Fi.
So this, I think something that people don't really appreciate. Again, how I was saying earlier, it's like a $70 trillion asset class. Is all of those primitives that crypto has invented, whether it's in ERC20, whether it's in ERC 721, whether it's all the DeFi primitives, all of that and more can be applied to IP, right? It's like bringing a whole new asset class on chain, a very valuable one and a very illiquid one until now. So just to answer your point, Rhett, there's a project on Story, for example, called Aria Protocol, and they're tokenizing music royalties. And they've tokenized. If you go to ariaprotocol.xyz, you'll see, and you go to the asset list, you'll see some pretty famous songs. They've tokenized Justin Bieber, Selena Gomez, BTS, Blackpink. Right now, it's partial rights, right? And they opened they raised something like, I forget the exact number, 7 or 9 million in 7 or 9 minutes, something like that, And that's the whole point, right? Is you tokenize these royalty streams and you earn yield, not just from DeFi generating yield, right? And you can read into that however you want, but from actual revenue in the real world, right? So those yields are coming in, and these types of asset classes are actually pretty good when you compare it to something like T-bills. And if you have a wide array of them, right? If you can diversify the royalty streams enough from several different music catalogs or from several different types of IPs, you can start to have a very predictable yield schedule that is much more than the traditional T-bill, and probably is arguably not that much riskier, right? Because it's very modelable. It's very predictable, and we're definitely seeing a lot of this behavior happening on Story as well.
So in terms of go to market, right? So are you guys, is music the initial target? Is it pictures? Is it something? Is it movies, videos, short clips, all of the above? Something I haven't named. Like I think, how do you think about it? Is it, do you need to go convince the creators to get on board, the buyers to get on board, some combination of both? How are you guys thinking about that?
I really think it's all of the above. I think there's some IP categories that are more structured and more mature when it comes to royalty streams than others, right? Images right now in the Web2 world, the most mature interpretation of it is stock photos, which is not all that exciting, right? But if you think about music, right, that has a huge industry behind it that has regulated credits and royalty streams it's a very, very structured industry where billions and billions of dollars every year are generated and also accrued and paid back. However, one interesting anecdote, which I found funny, I was talking to an industry expert in the music industry, is like in the Web2 world, if you try to go to like a famous song and try to acquire all of the rights to the whole song, right? And because they're spread across so many different people, it's like pouring water into a rug and trying to pick it back up, right? It's just so fine grained. So it's almost to an excess, right? But the advantage of having a structured industry is it is easier to kind of model and tokenize it. And that's what Aria is doing. And that's why they're starting with music, but they're also planning on going to different asset classes. One interesting one that you haven't mentioned, but I think is very interesting and very current is name, image, and likeness, right? Not just with AI being able to leverage name, image, and likeness in different ways, but also with the recent 20 years of influencers and on-chain personalities, YouTubers. There's a ton of like the name, image, and likeness industry as a whole has just continued to grow and grow and grow. And that is a very interesting category where there's a lot of a demand, right? There's proven demand from whether it's companies wanting name, image, and likeness for advertisements or for products, right? Or whether it's the influencers or VIPs themselves wanting to license out their likeness for movies or for any other form of creative endeavor. That's a very interesting one as well. So I think music and name, image, and likeness are two ones that are very easy to understand, but they can also be coupled with videos, short form content, TikTok, YouTube Shorts. There's a lot of revenue generation there happening as well, right? And it's kind of 50-50 in terms of where that revenue goes. 50% usually goes to the music rights holders and 50% goes to the creator of the video if it doesn't get demonetized, right? And so there are already some companies looking into how do we mash up, like license music and allow users to mash it up and use it in short form content and then tokenize those royalties back. That's also something interesting. And the last part of your question was like, okay, is it the demand side? Is it the supply side? Really, it is both, right? There's different types of people that are interested. On the demand side, it's going to be creators wanting to protect their work, as well as investors looking for new yield opportunities, right? So two different, perhaps overlapping to some degree, but very different types of people. And then on the supply side, it's obviously also creators looking to wanting to offer their music, their work, their videos, whatever, their name, image, and likeness, and having the right structure in place so that they can do so easily through protocols like Aria, which obviously is built on Story. So I think it's a mix of everything. We're kind of like bootstrapping everything, right? We're kind of creating a new asset class on chain, right? And so it takes a little bit of everything. I encourage anyone listening, if you do want to do something interesting in the realm of IP, to talk to us and to try it out, and to this is the time to be one of the OGs in the on-chain IP space.
I can think of so many interesting fun applications, like Pump Fun and virtuals have gotten a lot of, interest. Pump Fun, obviously, for easy launching meme coins, virtuals for kind of meme coins related to AI. I've got a buddy who's a great data scientist. He's not a musician at all, but he just as kind of a, test case, he took a bunch of like open source poetry, like old school poetry, turned it into songs using AI, and they're like really actually good songs. It'd be cool if there's some kind of like Pump Fun type thing where I could use AI to make a like new song, tie some meme coin to it. Meme coin gets royalties from, any use of the song. For the degens, there might be fun speculation there. And then, like I mentioned, Pendle and yield trading, things like that. I think that could be like so interesting. You have some people that have royalty backed securities where they, bundle up, or maybe not securities, but like they bundle up, 10,000 songs, issue some royalty payment based on that. And then someone else can go and build yield speculation markets on there. On that topic, do you guys plan to do anything with interop as well? You want it all living on Story, or are you going to allow some nice bridging, like if someone bundled that up and then wanted to bridge it up to another chain and do DeFi things there? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. We're integrated with Layer 0, so we're definitely interoperable. I just wanted to comment on one of your first points, because you kind of also hit the nail on the head around, like Pump.Fun and like just the more fun side of crypto. Although for me, it hasn't been so fun, to be honest. But we actually have an IP-based token platform called IP.world, where anyone can create an IP coin on anything else, but the IP owner has to be verified, and they have an automatic allotment reserved for them, right? So even if you launch it, you don't have access to it, and only who can verify it, and that's done manually, gets it, and they also have access to the liquidity pool fees. The other thing that's really interesting is actually with the virtuals team. We recently launched music by virtuals with them. They launched music by virtuals, and it's a really an interesting take where you can tweet. You can tag music by virtuals on any tweet, and they will generate a song based on that tweet, and it'll be tokenized, and like a token will be made of it. And some interesting stars like Wukong, which is a DJ, a famous DJ, also tokenized their song on music by virtuals as well. So there is some organic, some that type of activity happening. And the virtuals team has been very interested in exploring this as well on Story.
Interesting. I of course, everyone knows about the tokenize everything narrative, but I didn't know there was also a tokenize and make a song out of everything. That's interesting.
Yes. This is the world of AI, Bill. So anything can be generated seamlessly. It's no more just reply guying.
Listen, I have one thing I want to ask you about is there's a couple other chains that are maybe trying to do something similar to what you guys are doing, like basically making some platform for creators to be able to, safely monetize their assets, right? And can you talk a little bit about what is it called? I think it's called Emergence, right? So you guys have an advisor, a creative advisor. I forget his name. His name is David Goyer, and he has this Emergence, and it's like this new store. Like basically, I think it's partially like trying to create a story around the chain that people can create into. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically there's a lot of top-down IP that's been built by whether it's Marvel or Lucasfilms, right, like Star Wars, and then there's Emergence is more of like a bottoms-up. Let's create a massive Hollywood tier IP from the community, and I think David defines it as built to be built upon, right? And so he kind of set the first draft of the world Bible, and anyone else can add to it, and of course, it's not like anything can be added, but everyone can collaborate on it, and whatever you add is tracked, is registered, is attributed, and can make itself find its way into the canon of that world. And the idea is that from this core world Bible that everyone can kind of explode their creativity with, also pretty sizable works can be created from it, right? And basically create ideally $1 billion massive Hollywood tier IP, because just to mention, David Goyer is a top tier Hollywood a titan.
Yeah, I forget. I read about what did he work on? That I forget.
He worked on the Dark Knight trilogy.
Oh, right. Yes.
He wrote and produced it. He's worked on a series for Amazon Prime, like Foundation series. He's
right.
If you look him up, I'm probably doing him a disservice by just mentioning those two. He's definitely an OG in the. He worked on Blade. He worked on
nice.
Man of Steel. I think his IMDb page is super long. So he definitely has. He also worked on Terminator, so he has a lot of experience building IPs with top Hollywood studios, right? And this is kind of a new, fresh take around. Okay, how can we build it so that everyone can actually participate in it?
Got it. Okay. And listen, let me ask one more question, which is a little bit more on the business side, which is like, look, part of this exploration of creativity and IP on chain is about like essentially cutting out maybe what people perceive to be as unnecessary middlemen, right? Like, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but like they say the take rates in, from the creatives to the people who are actually the audience, like there's a lot of people in the middle, the take rate is high, and maybe we can reduce that with blockchain. But like Story Protocol is there's a lot of smart people working there, and you guys have to make money, right? So what's the business model for Story Protocol? How do you guys make money?
Yeah, so the traditional Web3 way for a decentralized service to sustain itself, right, is through the token and gas, right? There's like this two-sided market. The more the network gets used, the more gas is used, and that kind of creates one side. The focus right now is making sure that we make it as easy as possible for that ecosystem to grow, and then as transactions grow, as usage grows, and we're already seeing like a very vibrant start. But this is not a 2-year project. This is like a 10, 20-year roadmap that we have to really revolutionize IP. And if we even get to 1% of the IP and to the value of the asset classes that are on chain, the opportunities are immense. So, for example, just to be a little bit more practical, like the protocol does have a feature to charge a transaction fee for registering IP, right? Right now, we've chosen not to use it, but it could be added as the protocol grows to not just rely on gas, but also to rely on a very small transaction fee to register IP. Right, but of course we have so many things to do that right now we're focusing on growing usage, on working with applications so that they can make use of this programmable IP protocol, and then as usage grows, the opportunities will always be there.
Cool.
It's really cool. As you know, at the beginning when you were talking about the bureaucracy of getting IP registered, I couldn't help but think about the Doge discovery of like the mine shaft that you have to go down into to retire federal employees. Like there's actually, for people who don't know, there's like a mine somewhere. I actually don't know in which state, but there's a mine. There's an underground mine where they store all their paperwork, and it's actually paperwork, right? Like they don't do this by computer. It's actually like physical sheets of paper that have to be processed by humans who have to like drive to this mine shaft and go down this elevator, and you can only retire a portion of the federal employees every year because there's only so much physical capacity in getting humans into that
That's
mine, and it's just so bananas. So yeah, just this is like such an overhaul of that process, and it's a sort of 0 to 1 moment in a way, right? Like you're going from something that is so antiquated to something that is actually could serve like humanity for a long time.
Yes. And
so very exciting.
And the good news is it's not, we're not trying to replace the legal system. We're trying to amplify it. So as I said, like the license terms are applicable in the real world, right? And I think the idea is not to, again, I just don't want to seem like we're trying to like supersede the law, because that's not what we're trying to do. Is like, think of it as a facilitation layer so that eventually things can roll up to existing legal systems, but they're not hindered by them, right? Mm-hmm. And as whether it's an AI model generating thousands of inputs per second or millions of inputs per second, or whether it's companies managing millions of IPs and users building off of those and generating billions of remixes of those IPs, all of that can be tracked programmatically, and then in classical crypto fashion can be rolled up to the right institutions and to the right legal system because it'll take a long time for them to modernize, right? But if they can lean on something like this in the meantime, they can catch up, and we can integrate a lot more seamlessly.
I'm a big, you hear this phrase all the time, code is law. Which no, like code is code and law is law, and you can make the two of them interact a little bit better. Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, listen, thank you. This was a great overview. I still have 100 questions I want to ask you, but, I want to keep the podcast roughly close to an hour. This is very cool. Congratulations on all the success. I'm going to keep an eye on Story Protocol. Thank you for joining us, Andrea. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.